Want to know more about rock, jazz, rhythm, and blues? You got to start from the bottom up. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with David C. Gross and Tom Semioli. Two bass road warriors tell tales, interview the greats, and spin more great music than you can shake a Chapman stick at. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with your hosts, David C. Gross and Tom Semioli, every Monday at 8 on Cygnus Radio.
Well, hi, it's David Gross for the Bass Guitar Radio Show on CygnusRadio.com. Tonight, we're going to be talking with FREEBO, with my co-host, head honcho for Know Your Bass player, Tom Semioli. So let's dig right in with fretless bassist FREEBO. Hi, Tom. Hi, FREEBO.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. How you doing?
All
Excellent.
right.
So, FREEBO, the last time I saw you was actually in 1976, I think it was. We were opening for you with Aztec Two-Step when you were doing the Bridgeport Highlight with Bonnie.
Oh, my God. You know what? I actually remember. I remember that. Well, how could you forget a venue like that? The Highlight Fronton, right?
The Fronton, yes, where we had wonton.
Fronton and the Fronton, great.
And you know what?
Yeah, great to see you guys.
You had now I don't know if it was someone you guys contracted or if it was from the Fronton, but the piano tuner was blind, and so we. Obviously, opening that, getting a 19-second sound check. And, of course, you know, the piano tuner was still working. I have never been yelled at more forcefully that day for noodling, trying to get a sound while that was going on.
You know what? For some strange reason, man, I seem to remember that. And I seem to remember being annoyed with the piano tuner or the stage manager or whoever set that up so that it was going into the sound check. It's really interesting. I just remember going, come on, somebody does not have their shit together, or the piano tuner, blind or not, is so in his own world that, and I get it because you want to tune it perfectly, but it's so classic. It's like, how many times do you walk into a sound check, is scheduled, say, for 4 o'clock, and the sound guy is just setting up the microphones and getting his chorus together. It's like, you know what? Be a professional, for God's sake. Do your job. Be ready so that I don't have to sit around and then everything. And before you know it, we don't have time to really do our sound check, let alone the opening act. I mean, it's just...
You came into my dressing room, into the Aztec dressing room, to find out if I was okay. You did do that.
Oh, wow. What a nice guy.
You know, it just dawned on me. So how funny is that?
Excellent. Excellent. David, what do you play?
I was the bass player.
You're the bass player with Aztec.
I was playing a fretless Carl Thompson at that time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, was I playing? I guess I was still playing my Fender. Yeah.
Yes.
Fender fretless. And I think I also had a Music Man. What year was that?
76.
It was with the band. 76, 5?
76.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
but you definitely had your Fender P, which oddly enough, the very first precision bass I owned was a fretless P bass, 1969.
One of the very first ones.
Yes, Stuart gave it to me from Manny's. Story goes basically, I walked in, I had saved up enough money for a P bass, Sunburst, and I was going home with a Sunburst P bass. And Stuart came downstairs. He said, the only Sunburst P bass is fretless. I said, fine, I'm taking it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I was in Philadelphia in, I guess it was 69 probably, and with the Edison Electric Band. Right. And I was playing my 63 precision bass, regular bass, and I would go into this music store called, I guess it was Music City on Chestnut Street, and they knew me. And one day I walked in, maybe in 67 or 68, and they had an Ampeg fretless bass. And I thought, wow, what a great concept, a fretless electric bass. You get the combination of the electric and the acoustic, the upright. I thought, how cool. But it's not a Fender, it's an Ampeg, and it doesn't sound like a Fender. About a year later or so, I walked in, and I remember remarking about it, and the owner said, hey, look what we just got. And it was a Fender fretless bass, which is probably 69, like you're talking about. And I went, wow, I think I played it, I went, wow, this is wonderful. I think I probably put $10 down or $20 down for whatever it was. and eventually got it a couple months later. And I sat there for several months at least without my playing it, probably because I was intimidated. And the band, the Edison Electric Band, we wound up with a gig in a bar in Northeast Philly 6 nights a week. It's either 4 or 5 sets a night, 40 on, 20 off. And I thought, this is not a whole lot of people I know are going to come see this. This might be a good opportunity for me to take the fretless and get used to it. And during that week, I played only the fretless, and I have not put it down since. And I'm so glad that happened. It was the same thing walking into the store where they said, hey, look what we got. And I believe it was 1969. And that bass actually got stolen right before we did Bonnie's second record, 1972. And I got another new one, which is the one I have now.
And that rosewood neck, it was beautiful fretboard, huh?
Yeah. Another bass story, I also remember going into that same music store, Music City in Philly, and Fender had just come out with the Fender 5, and it had a high string. So it was, I guess, a C string, right? a high C string. And I thought to myself, I said, what's the point of having a higher string? They should have a lower string. They should have a low B string. Lo and behold, years later, they come out with the 5 string. And this is what I've been playing for the past,
Music Man,
for the past.
That's a fabulous instrument.
The Stinger. I love this. I think this is their second generation. It's like a 1988, I guess. And so I've been playing this for 33 years, and pretty much exclusively. I rarely play fretted. Occasionally I'll bring out my 63 precision that I have flat one strings on. But I just love this thing so much. I know exactly where to put the dials, pretty much the same every time. The strings are, pretty old. I don't know if you can see how kind of like frayed already on here. I keep thinking about putting new strings on, but
no.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. And,
I both are unlined fretless.
Unlined, yeah. We do have it just in full exposure.
You have the dots.
Exposure. We do have the dots to keep the third fit. Without those, it would be really, really difficult.
I find that the lines actually screw people up more so than not, because there's no way that you could be 100% in front of the fret, so to speak. And the higher you go, the worse it's going to be. But then you have a whole bunch of quote unquote professionals like Mark Egan, Gary Willis, folks like that swear by lines. Do you think any of your tuba playing kind of thing sort of made it a little more, or is it just for the same reason I did, that was the only fretless you had at the time and it had no line?
I say more the latter. It's the way it came out. Honestly, in retrospect, I like the fact that it doesn't have the lines simply because it looks cooler. Yeah, it really does. It's just, you don't have lines on an upright bass. You just kind of learn to do it. And when you get down to it, it's just kind of judging. Between the open string and the third fret, you've got 2 other, quote, frets positions. And you just have to figure that as you go up the neck, the frets get smaller and smaller. So you just kind of go, okay, it's a little bit bigger from the nut to the first fret, and then you go down a little bit to the second to get to the third. So it's all a question of judging, and ultimately it's up to your ear. That's really what it's all about.
And also the lines, as we've discussed, a neck, during the life of a bass, the neck expands and contracts. So the lines actually become a hindrance because they're inaccurate, especially going from hot weather to cold weather. I
never thought of that it actually expands and contracts. Is that true?
Very slightly, but enough to make the lines. I had a line when I first mutilated a Fender fretted bass. I pulled the frets out and had the putty, the putty marks.
Right.
And then, of course, in New York, you go from 90-degree humidity, and then you go into an air-conditioned room. Certainly the neck expands and contracts. You're much better off without the lines. Obviously, you just got to train your ears and your hand positioning. That's what it's all about, technique and ear.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the Music Man, Leo and Ernie Ball, man, they got it right. I think that Music Man 5 is just, if you're going to play a 5, you're going to play an Ernie Ball Music Man, and a fretless. They really just a sweet tone. It's got everything.
Interesting. Do you have one?
Yeah.
A 5-string fretless?
Stingray. I think it's a mid-'90s one, yeah, which I bought, I think, in San Francisco when I lived there.
Oh, it's probably the same version as mine, I'm guessing. I fortunately knew. I got to know those people. Sterling, who's been running the company and pretty much had a lot to do with getting involved with Music Man. Obviously, Ernie knew Leo Fender. You know, they're both icons in the music business. But I met Sterling when he was probably like 18 years old and working there, and we've been good friends. And they actually gave me, I think I have the 15th Music Man bass made. It's like B0015. And you know, the very first one, kind of thuddy. And they've since given me this one and given me a later one. It's called a bongo.
Oh, right, the bongo bass,
which is really wild. It's
cutaway, right?
Yeah, it's almost too much for me. It's like I mean, how do you? It's like it's so many options. It's like wait a second, which is what's great about the Fender. Boop, just turn it all the way up, plug it in. It's a Fender bass. It's either precision or a jazz. I mean, the precision you have a little less control than a jazz, but boom, turn it up and there it is. So I love them, and I agree with you, Tom, that there's something about it that it's got and partly the way I play it. I mean, I think that there are times when I play it when you don't even know it's a fretless, especially if you're playing R&B.
Yeah, if you play it, sure.
When you're playing, you know, it's really a cool combination of really meaty. But if you want to get that ow, you can do that. You can do that too, depending on, you know, where you pluck it, where your right hand is, whether it's closer to the bridge or the neck. But I love it. I've never really played another one. I think I played Hutch's, who plays with Bonnie now.
Yeah, sure.
I sat in with Bonnie a couple of times, and he handed me his fretless bass. I forget what kind it was. It was really sensitive, and you know, I mean, you really have to get to know it. And here I am in front of a couple thousand people, just you know, trying to figure it out. I guess it was all right. Truthfully, I really haven't played. I don't think I've ever played a Fender 5-string bass or fretless bass. But you know, they're all different. You know, it's just a question of getting used to it. And who's to say what's better? And it depends on the player. You know,
right? Depends.
I mean, I'm going to say Jimmy Johnson, who plays with James Taylor.
Oh,
who's one of my absolute favorite bass players. I mean, it just gets an incredible sound out of his bass. It's not a Fender. It's not a Music Man. I'm not sure what it is. So
I don't know.
It's all subjective. I'm sorry. What were you going to say, Tom?
Well, I was going to just say, you're playing. You know, you're one of those rare fretless players that, to my ears, listen to your work on your own and with Bonnie. You play with sort of a rhythm and blues type disposition. Is that the music that you grew up listening to?
Wow. You want to know what I grew up listening to, to Beethoven, Richard Strauss, John Philip Sousa, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Frank Sinatra, Patti Page.
Weren't those rhythm and blues players, Dave?
But the first rhythm and blues really that I grew up in a little coal town, eastern Pennsylvania, and you know there are mountains, you know, the mountains of eastern Pennsylvania. So the only radio that we really get, I couldn't even get Philadelphia radio, but we get WKBW in Buffalo.
Okay.
Sometimes WLS in Chicago. Certainly those 50,000 watt stations would drift over. And probably the first real R&B I heard was, like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino. I mean, close to R&B. They're certainly coming from blues roots, the whole black experience. I mean, those three, when I think about it, are really different. Little Richard, Chuck Berry and Fats Domino, but they all had a certain swing to their music that I had never heard before. I mean, and especially in Eastern polkas, and marches, and I loved marches and the marching band, and then classical music, which is beautiful and really helped my ear, but it's very straight ahead.
Right.
All of a sudden, to get those feels, especially Chuck Berry, somewhere between straight and shuffle, it's just that wonderful in between, swing kind of a thing, and I grew up with some jazz. I mean, my parents loved Louis Armstrong. Okay. So that's a combination of jazz and that whole New Orleans thing, and being always loving the tuba. I love the early Dixieland stuff where the tuba was in it, and I mean, the Louis Armstrong stuff had upright bass, but again, it's that feel, it's that R&B feel. So when I first started playing bass, and I didn't pick it up till I was probably like 21, I had already been playing the tuba in high school. I sang bass in the choir. I always loved the a cappella choir, Christmas carols. I was always, for me, it's pretty much a head thing, Tom. You know, I was always drawn to the bass part of the music. It was my favorite harmony. And to me, the way I conceive it, it's almost like a counter melody. It is a counter melody to the melody. And it's really what defines the melody. It's what's underneath it. And then there's really the third part, the harmony note. And you know what, the third, the fifth, whatever you put in there that really defines the type of chord. But I'm thinking top and bottom. And I'm kind of going parallel with it and doing all these different things. So it's really a headspace for me. And as I got into being a bass player, that's when I really started listening to, I think I listened to others. I would listen to a Chuck Berry song way back in the day, and I hear boom, 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 boom. You know, I'm listening to that kind of stuff. So once I started playing the bass, I'm kind of taking what's in my head. I'm thinking like a tuba player a little bit. So a lot of people say, you know, when you play fretless bass, it sounds a little bit like a tuba. Well, it's just the way I'm thinking, you know. So it's combining that, a little bit the sound of the bass. And then I'm starting to hear, obviously, James Jamerson, like, whoa, from Motown. Yeah. Oh, just some great stuff. And Chuck Rainey and all the guys from Atlantic, you know, the Aretha Franklin stuff, you know, and then David Hood, you know, the Muscle Shoals stuff, and Duck Dunn, you know, the Stack stuff, and even, you know, with the Grateful Dead, Phil Lesh. All of a sudden here's, oh my God, here's a melodic thing where you can start with the jam. He's the guy really in the Dead that really makes the jam go. I mean, Jerry does Jerry stuff, but it's Phil Lesh's bottom that moves the whole thing.
And then Phil was also classically trained, if I'm not mistaken.
He was a horn player, I think, a trumpet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So my style really came from first my head. It's really all the head. And then it's like learning certain riffs and learning certain motifs and certain genres. And, you know, and then really getting into the subtlety of some of the blues players, like, what do you play on a Jimmy Reed shuffle? You know, there's so many different kinds of shuffles, you know, and a halftime and a double time, on the beat, playing a little bit behind the beat, right? You know, R&B stuff. And then in jazz, playing like a little bit ahead of the beat, which took me a while to get because I really had to lay back and do that R&B thing. And all of a sudden I was playing some pretty cool jazz cats on some just experimental for me. I always loved jazz, but I've never considered myself a jazz player. I have the utmost respect for those guys. Yeah. But playing stuff out of the real book with no drums, and one of the horn players kept saying, "You're slowing down." And what I was doing, I was kind of phrasing, like he phrased behind the beat, so I was kind of phrasing behind the beat with him, because that's what I would do with Bonnie when we played with Bonnie as a duet, you know, which we did for 3 years.
Yes,
I would just float with her. Her time was all over the place, which was fine, but I would float with it. And now I'm doing this jazz thing where I'm the guy that's keeping time, and they keep saying, "No, you're slowing down." I'm thinking, I'm not slowing down. I'm phrasing with you. And so I had to go, what is she saying? And finally get to the point where I'm doing, and really listen and go, oh, wow, they're a little bit on top of the beat. Yeah. So there's all this really subtle stuff that really comes down to being, I think, a really good player. This way beyond just the technique.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a question of concept.
Well, you know, Tom and I always talk about the fact that most of the players who grew up late 50s, early 60s, we call it pre-Jocko. These guys, Willie Dixon, whether they knew it or not.
Oh, yeah.
That was your guy in your Chuck Berry records. You were learning from Willie Dixon.
Was that Willie Dixon?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I wasn't aware of that. Obviously, I knew he did a whole bunch of those a lot of blues records.
And Bill Black.
So, right away, you have a different, Jameson came out of jazz. Most of the cats came out of jazz, the upright tradition. It's interesting how with Louis Armstrong and such, or even the original Dixieland Jazz Band, you're going back to the tuba and, the two beat and stuff like that. Yeah. So obviously you must have read music.
Well, I learned to read music, taking piano lessons. That was my first instrument. And I think I started probably like at 5 years old. An older brother, 3 years older. So he'd been playing for a year or two and I was listening to him practice. And I would sit at the piano and I would kind of fool and figure some things out. And I started taking lessons. I learned to read notes, but either for better or for worse, I don't know. I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword, but I pretty much I cheated. I looked at the numbers with my fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And with the notes, I pretty much went, every good boy does fine, good boys do fine always. So I never really learned how to sight read just to see the note automatically go.
Right.
It was a little bit easier in the a cappella choir when I was reading music. Singing because I could see if the skip was, a third or a fourth or a fifth. That helped. And then with tuba, the same thing. I learned to recognize the notes of playing a B flat horn,
right.
And the tuba I have now is I have a B flat, but I also have a C tuba, which really helps me relate to rock and roll keys. But as far as, I think I probably never became a top-notch session player, like the kind of cats who can go in and really read a score for a movie or a TV show or whatever. Probably because I never learned to do that. I always use my head. I'm real good with a chord chart, so I know where to go, but it allows me to come up with my own part, figure out my own part. I don't know if that's stubbornness. I don't know if it's creativity, somewhere between the two. But, as it turns out, it all worked out okay.
It worked out. Didn't hurt. Well, a lot of players get hired for their field. Most of the studio players we've spoken to, and I'm talking about guys like Phil Spalding and Mickey Feet, who some of the British guys we've spoken to, and they mostly got hired for their field, not so much their dexterity and their chops, but what they can contribute to a part. Because like you, they would get just a simple lead sheet. That's it. And it was up to you to bring it to the table, bring your own identity to the part, to the music.
Yeah, which again is a mixed blessing too, because as I've heard Carol Kay lament, there are times when we really help to define the music and the song and often created a part that became a seminal part, a riff, a hook, that really helped define the song and could possibly be interpreted as a part of songwriting credit. Like Carol Kay being a great example. Do 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 do. The beat goes on.
Right.
That's the whole song, and she came up with that. She got her session pay or her double session and never got songwriting credit. Personally, that's one of my beefs, is that I think there are times if somebody comes up with a seminal part that really defines the song, that they should get some back end credit, because that winds up being money.
Yeah, well, that's always been a bone of contention. Go ahead, Dave.
Didn't Anthony Jackson win a lawsuit for the love of money?
I think he might have. It's interesting. We just spoke with Carmen Rojas about David Bowie's big dance hit, and Carmen came up with the bass part, which defines the song, yet he's played as a session player. On the other side of the coin, you have a guy like Earl Slick, another top session guy, who says, hey, that's why I charge what I do for my session work. He won't get just a regular session fee. He'll charge double, triple, quadruple scale, whatever it is. But he comes in with a hook that makes your record a hit record. So,
right.
In the rock and roll era, this got all sort of jumbled around.
Yeah, hey, the music business has never been fair, let's face it.
Really? We're not in it for the money, I guess.
Well, on the other hand, it's all we do, and we have to make a living. We have to pay the rent like everybody else, so you got to make some money from it.
Yes, of course, yeah.
That's true. Now,
which a lot of people don't realize. They say, but you guys love what you do. We do love what we do, but we have to pay the rent.
That's true. A mortgage is a good thing when it's paid.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, FREEBO, you started your recording career, I guess, with the Edison Electric Band.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, another groove, a solid groove band. You guys, you drew from rhythm and blues, you drew from soul, you drew from jazz, you drew from everything. Tell us about that band. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like how did my whole career come about? Basically, if you take the early years, like I said, of piano lessons at 5, of hearing all the music I heard. I mean, one of my favorite expressions is the one that John Lennon made famous, "Life's what happens when you're busy making other plans."
Right.
And, I do a lot of speaking now, kind of inspirational, motivational speaking. And in it, I talk about how at 5 years old or so, they say, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And of course, had I been smart enough, I said, "I don't know. I'm 5 years old." I mean, so basically you say, "Oh, I don't know." And they say, "Well, I'd like you to be like a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman, I mean, be white collar rather than blue collar. You have a better chance of being a happy human being because you'll be successful. You make more money." The inference being that, the more money you make, the more successful you are, therefore the happier you are. And we've all found out that that is not necessarily true. Whether you look at Shakespeare or anybody else, it's just not necessarily the case. So I essentially went off to, of my choice that I was given was to be a doctor. So it means you're going to go to college and you're going to take pre-med and then you're going to go to medical school and all these things. Well, now what I like to say is that pre-med I was given calculus, chemistry, physics, biology, none of which had anything to do with healing people. And I didn't do very well at it, and I pretty much busted out of pre-med and found myself in college just kind of bouncing around saying, who am I? What am I supposed to do? What's this all about? And going, in the meantime, I had joined the choir, the a cappella choir with the bass. I had joined the high school band when I wasn't playing football, playing tuba. So I was always good at music. I always loved music, but music was never on the front burner. Because when I grew up, as a kid, it was before rock and roll, and then when rock and roll came out, it was rock and roll to say, if you're going to be a musician, you had to be a classical musician or a jazz musician, or maybe teach, none of which felt right to me. I thought, well, I could be a classical tuba player, but I'd have to practice probably for 10 hours a day to be one of the top 20 tuba players in the country. And then it'd sit in the orchestra and go, put the horn down, count for 34 bars, pick it up, put it down again. I said, I don't think I want to do that. If I'm going to play, I want to play all the time. So I happened to pick up guitar between junior and senior year of high school. I went off to a summer camp to be a waiter, and I met a counselor there, and she played guitar, and I could relate to guitar because my dad had showed me a couple chords on the ukulele, which essentially is the top 4 strings of a guitar. It's the same ratio between the strings. And so when she showed me guitar, I just kind of added the bottom strings, which is real natural for me because that's where my ear went. So I learned maybe the basic 6-7 chords on guitar and a basic strum. Came back senior year of high school, told my band director, "Hey, Mr. Mitchell, I learned to play guitar." I said, "Hey, we've got this old Martin guitar. I've been sitting in the closet forever. No, but you can have it for your whole senior year." Great. So now I have a guitar. So now I'm playing guitar a little bit. My buddy I played football and basketball with, George Cunningham, he played guitar. He knew a couple more things than me. We'd sit in his 51 Chevy and, pass the guitar back and forth. He'd show me some things. I'd show me. We'd discover some stuff. He ended his senior year. I put it away, went off to college, my failed pre-med thing. And the third year of college, I wound up in a school in Germany. And my roommate was a guy named Jerry Donahue. And Jerry Donahue was, he was a year younger than me. I think I was 20 or 21. He was 19. And he had played in some rock and roll bands, and he had a guitar, and he was pretty good. I didn't have a guitar. I'd given it back to Mr. Mitchell. But the very first day, he pulled out his guitar and just kind of started playing. And I thought I want to jam with him. So I found somebody at the other end of the hall, had a guitar. I borrowed it. I came down. I just started plucking along with him. I naturally went to little bass notes, jamming with him.
4 strings, yeah.
And he stopped playing. He said, "How'd you learn to do that?" I said, "What?" He said, "Play bass like that." I said, "I don't know. I just do it. I don't know." He said, well, you're a natural bass player. We got to get you a bass. We got to start a band. So we did. This is 1964 in Germany. We got a Framus bass for 50 marks, which was $12.50. And we all played out of a Fender Bassman blonde piggyback amp. It had 2 channels, actually four inputs. We had 2 guitars, the bass, and the vocal all going through this amp, and a drummer. And we played a couple of gigs at a couple of Army PXs and at the school. And this was my very first experience playing bass, and I really enjoyed it. So that the next year when I came back to the States and went to the University of Pennsylvania and joined the Glee Club as a bass and met a guy in the Glee Club who was also down the hall from me, had a guitar. I played his guitar a little bit, and when he said, hey, you're a pretty good guitar player, you got to meet this guy, Mark Jordan, who's he's a baritone in the Glee Club, and he plays guitar and piano, and he's really good, and he can hear any song, a Beatles song, whatever, and he knows what the chord changes are. And I went, well, that's no big deal. I can do that. I mean, can't everybody do that? Can't everybody just hear a song and kind of hear what the chord changes are? And so that's what I thought at the time. So I met Mark Jordan, and we sat down and we played, and it was cool. And he said, hey, we're just starting a band and we need a bass player. I can do that because I had played bass with Jerry Donahue. It turns out that Jerry Donahue wound up going on to be a world-class guitar player who played in the second incarnation of Fairport Convention.
Okay.
I pretty much took over for Richard Thompson and played with Joan Armatrading and just a whole bunch of people in Britain. So that's kind of how the whole Edison Electric thing happened. That was 1966. And that band stayed together for 5 years. And during that time, I kind of went from short-haired, straight, mental, old me into becoming FREEBO, where I got turned on the pot and turned on the acid and turned on my head. And it was the 60s and turned around and being in a rock and roll band with all this stuff going on and all this, what turns out to be a golden age of music. And we were playing original music. We were playing somewhere between blues, like Paul Butterfield blues band type of stuff, and Traffic, and just a whole bunch of things and original tunes. So it was this hybrid that you're talking about, Tom, that was a little bit jazz, a little bit blues, a little bit rock and roll, a little bit rhythm and blues, a little bit early jam band. So we liked the Dead. So we were
improvising.
Oh yeah, we were very much a jam band. And so that's kind of how it happened. Bottom line, it happened all by accident. And then in 1968, we had a gig. There was a place in Philadelphia called the Electric Factory. It was one of the psychedelic dungeons, and all the greats would come through there. And we would open up occasionally. There was a big, almost a jealousy, but competition between the local band, who would get to open up for Jimi Hendrix or Big Brother and the Holding Company, whatever. Well, we'd open up for Big Brother and we'd open up for the Dead. And in this case, we're opening for Procol Harum. It was 1968. And a fella came down to see us, Dick Waterman. Dick Waterman managed Buddy Guy and Junior Wells and Arthur Big Boy Crudup and Mississippi Fred McDowell. And we were a semi-blues band, and he was kind of interested in managing us, and he brought his young girlfriend down at the time to see what she thought. Turns out it was an 18-year-old Bonnie Raitt, who was a freshman at Radcliffe. And so here we are opening for Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale, and Bonnie hears me play, and here's the band. She likes the band. She likes the way I play bass. We became friends. Dick and she became friends with the band. I went to her first show in Philadelphia, watched her nervously going, "Oh, I'm terrible." Everybody loved her, and I watched her grow bit by bit. And in 71, early 71, when our band was breaking up, I got a call from her. And she said, I just got a deal with Warner Brothers. I can make a record anywhere I want. I'm going to make it in Minnesota with Willie Murphy and Snaker Dave Ray. I love the way you play bass. I wonder if you would maybe be the bass player on the record along with Willie Murphy's band, and maybe come up to Boston and learn a couple tunes and do a guest set with me and see if we can do a couple gigs beforehand. I flew up to Boston, was like butter, worked great. We loved working together. Her friends liked the way I played. And so I very seamlessly just went from the end of Edison Electric into the beginning of Bonnie Raitt, and that lasted for 10 years, put me on a whole different level. And that's my story. That's how the whole bass thing happened, really quite by accident.
How did you graduate from playing on stage into the studio? Because those are two different temperaments, and David and I always discuss that. There's one thing about playing on the stage, and then there's another thing about playing in the studio. How did you hone your skills to be a studio player?
That's a great question, man. Because they are two different.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's almost like two different skills, because live you don't worry about dynamics. You tend to play more. In the studio, less is more, and dynamics are really important. The difference of 3 dB, you either are there present or you're gone from the tape. You go into the red, and you distort the tape. So it's a much more controlled thing in the studio. And to me, and what I've learned over the years is, how do you take the live vibe, the vibe of live, where you're really listening and you're just really putting 100% into it, but technically you're kind of toning it down a little bit and controlling it, but you're still keeping the zest and the spirit of the music. In both cases, you're listening, but I think you're realizing that, again, I don't know about you guys, but when I go in the studio, I always seem to wind up playing more. And as I listen to the take and as I hone my part, I wind up taking stuff out.
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe it's because I want to try, so I want to see if this works, but I invariably wind up with less. So I think it's two different skills, and I think there are some players who are really good live who are not good in the studio, and others who are really good in the studio and not good live. I always prided myself on being both, two different things. Definitely an adjustment, but I think it's possible. So ultimately it's about listening. You guys know that. I mean,
yeah.
Ensemble playing is all about listening. That I always like to say, if you know your instrument, you don't have to be great on it, but you just have to know it and have a concept. If you're playing with other people, if you're listening to what they are playing, not to what you're playing, if you're listening to what they're playing, you will intuitively know what to play, because you'll know where the holes are. You'll know what's not being played, where you need to support something. You'll know when somebody else is taking a fill and you don't take it. You know when they're not. And you're hoping that everybody else in that ensemble is also listening to you and everyone. And when that does happen, it's magic. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's like 3, 4, 5, 6 people making love all at the same time. It's wonderful, but it's all about listening. There's so many young musicians who don't get that. And I think the older you get, as you mature, you finally figure that out. Therefore, the math suggests that the more people are playing, the less you have to play. Because if everybody's playing everything they want to play, it's just going to get so crowded. Again, the older I get, the more it's about less is more.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that, for our show, we hope we get a nice younger listening audience who actually can pick up on this. It's not hard to believe that everyone we've spoken to has the same vibe in terms of, playing less. As young guns, so to speak, we're all ready to show how fast we can play, how
sure.
Stops, this, that, and the other thing. And as time goes on, you're absolutely right. It changes. Not only does the time musically change, but your actual maturing and what you listen to changes as well. I do want to ask you one question. What's your favorite classical piece for tuba?
Classical piece for tuba? I think there's a wonderful children's record that had a huge influence on me called Tubby the Tuba. And it is classical. It's just a beautiful piece where the instruments become like characters. Tubby the tuba, Peepo the piccolo, and it's all about this tuba who really kind of laments the fact that he never gets to play the melody. And he's in the orchestra, and one day he meets a frog. He's sitting by the river and he's feeling bad, and the frog hops up beside him and starts singing his song and says, "Oh, Tubby." I mean, it's a wonderful fantasy. And basically Tubby goes, "Oh, may I sing your song, Mr. Frog?" And he plays it, which is a beautiful melody. on the way out, the frog says, Tubby, you must try this with your orchestra sometime. And, oh, I will, Mr. Frog, I will. And the next day, the orchestra's all busy tuning up and buzzing over the arrival of the brand new conductor, Senor Pizzicato. And he goes, okay, begin. And Tubby begins to play his own little melody and starts to play, and the instruments start to laugh at him. And the conductor goes, Tubby, I've never heard a tuba play a melody before. Let's hear the rest of it. And then Tubby plays his melody, and can I play your melody too, please, Tubby? And by the end of the song, everybody loves him, and Tubby loves him, and Tubby winds up going down to the bass parts. It's just a beautiful story, and it's an introduction to the orchestra. Incredible tuba playing, a beautiful melody that goes really high and really low. It's just gorgeous. So to answer your question, I'd have to say Tubby the Tuba. There are several versions. The version that I grew up with, the narrator was Victor Jury, Jory.
Right.
I mean, I think there's one with Danny Kaye.
Yeah.
There are a couple different versions, but if you can listen to the version with Victor Jury, and I know it's on YouTube because I've listened to it, and I played it for a friend of mine.
Wasn't he a radio star? A radio actor?
He was a beautiful, radio actor, and also, I mean, he was in some movies too, but yeah, just this incredible voice and just what he does. The other side of the record was Peter and the Wolf, narrated by Basil Rathbone, who of course was Sherlock Holmes.
That's a wonderful story. I love it. Thank you.
You hear her as she really sophisticated her singing style. She incorporated more and more of the John Raitt thing. She always having, the first time I heard her sing, I heard that vibrato, just that perfect vibrato, not too fast like Joan Baez, I was
going to say.
and not too, so just the right amount of, and just in the right places and control and beautiful pitch, but all that bluesy, soulful stuff that she put in. And then, of course, how nobody, in my opinion, can take a lyric and really express the emotion of that lyric melodically, and from the body like Bonnie can. She tear your heart out with it. So it's not just about singing the melody, it's about evoking the emotion of the lyric and combining it with that. And then you throw in the soulfulness of blues and rhythm and blues, and you got classic Bonnie Raitt. I'm working with a singer now, Alice Howe.
Alice Howe, yeah, sure.
And I produced her last record, and I'm producing her next one. We do a lot of work together. In fact, we do a regular Wednesday night online thing, a streaming thing called Inside Live with Alice and FREEBO.
We've got to plug that one, David.
Every Wednesday at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern.
Oh, good.
This, I think, is our 21st episode. We're having Tom Paxton
fabulous.
As our special guest. Yeah. Last week we had Brian Auger on the organ with his family playing ham B3. A week before that we had David Amram, 90 years old, who worked with Thelonious Monk and worked with a lot of great jazz people. Played
French horn, right?
Classical French horn. The Philadelphia Orchestra also played jazz French horn.
Right.
Has written some symphonies.
He was part of that Gunther Schuller third stream, right?
Exactly. Yeah, an amazing guy, 90 years old, still doing it. Humble as could possibly be, appreciative as could be, just really inspirational guy. We just a whole bunch of Albert Lee, the great guitar player, doing with Albert. They went with Lawrence Juber, who was the guitar player in Wings, the first one. So we've done a bunch of that stuff, and you can get it all. You can go to my Facebook page, FREEBO fan page, or we do it through Norma's Rare Guitars YouTube page. Norma's Rare Guitars is a wonderful. No, it's right here in L.A. It's a music store, and he sells all sorts of vintage instruments.
Yeah, I think I've seen you do some videos there. Yeah.
A lot of people. I mean, Tom Petty's gone in and done stuff there. I think Dylan done just a whole bunch of really cool people. Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah.
But we kind of work through. So if you go on to YouTube at Norman's Rare Guitars and just look up Inside Live, with Alice and FREEBO, all 21 episodes of the show are archived, or just come in and see it live, and you can join the chat and be there right with us. And now we have a Zoom afterwards where we get together with our special guests, so you can ask questions of them, and it's a nice back and forth. So that's been cool. My bottom line is with Alice, what's interesting is She's got a beautiful voice. I mean,
yes, she does. Yes,
as gorgeous a voice. I mean, just impeccable pitch, just a beautiful tonality. It's been interesting working with her, where I can take what I learned from working with Bonnie, a lot of which was through osmosis. I didn't even realize what I picked up, but just that thing I was talking about, how Bonnie can really emote the emotion of the lyric, and kind of help Alice with that, to help take her to another level. And Alice came pretty much from the folk world, but it turns out she listened to a lot of Taj Mahal and Muddy Waters when she was young. And I heard her singing a little of that stuff one day. I said, wait a second, we got to throw some of that into your music. So to help shape her and navigate her into this and get her to sink more into her body with the emotion and just watch it happen. And it's also really cool because as a bass player, it's reawakened what I did with Bonnie in 71, 2, and 3, where we were a duo, where as a fretless bass player, I am playing with an acoustic guitar, which Alice, and a voice. And so now I'm thinking the way I thought back then, where I am a counter melody, where I am sometimes holding a note and letting her sing and then answering with some sort of a riff, and supporting and doing this whole counter melody thing. And so it's taken me what I call not around a circle, but further up the spiral. Life's kind of like a circle. You kind of come back to where you were, but as the years go by, you come back a little bit higher with a little bit more perspective. So now I come back 40 years later, working with a beautiful singer-songwriter, playing fretless bass, being a better player than I was.
Sure.
With a more sophisticated concept, but being able to take these things that I figured out playing with Bonnie and now bring them into this. So when we play live and I'm playing as her bass player, which I really enjoy doing, I even taught her some bass so she can play some bass with me on my song.
I saw a video where you were playing acoustic guitar and singing. She was playing a fretless Stingray.
She's playing my 5-string, yeah. Yeah, in fact, she plays that better than 4. She can't quite figure out the 4-string yet because I showed her on the 5-string, which is really bizarre. So, yeah, it's funny, what goes around comes around, and it's been a really, really cool adventure.
What are some of the Alice tracks we should play from the record?
Well, some of the stuff we wrote together, her latest record is called Visions, and a couple songs are really cool. One called Twilight is the opening cut, and I play actually kind of a nice little bass riff that it became a signature lick on it. The guitars answer da 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 da. And that's from my early classical music training. It really taught me about melody. So that song and another one is Still on My Mind that we co-wrote. And there are all sorts of different stuff in it. I don't. No, I don't. I mean, I know Jocko did some of that kind of stuff with I don't know if it's a phase or a
flange.
Flange. It was really kind of cool. Hey, when Jocko came out, I mean, look, that was mind-blowing, and everybody wanted to be like Jocko. I don't think anybody has since, because what Jocko had was incredible groove. But, I mean, look, he's one, like Jimi Hendrix, he's one of a kind. But he certainly opened up a lot of stuff in the bass that a lot of us had no idea existed, like harmonics.
Well, you were actually, guys, almost, in some ways, you brought the electric bass, the fretless bass, to the forefront and sort of separating it as its own instrument from the upright, because as we know, electric bass in the beginning was considered either the bastard child of the upright or the electric guitar. But what you were doing on fretless in a pop context with Bonnie, and what Jocko was doing with Weather Report in a fretless bass, because you know this, David, the Jazz Police didn't like electric bass, was kind of defining it as its own instrument there. So it's kind of interesting that in the mid-'70s, you guys were kind of pushing the instrument to, giving the instrument its own identity in that sense.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have a quick Jocko story that kind of dovetails onto that. That apparently, I guess it was 1977, and a friend of mine, John Hall, who from Orleans, guitar player, he wrote Still the One and Dance with Me.
He was also my congressman when I was living in Nyack.
Exactly. He was a 2-term congressman in upstate New York. John Hall called me one day and said, "FREEBO, you got to go I got to go to the Roxy. Weather Report is playing there next couple of nights. And they've got this new bass player, a guy named Jocko. He plays fretless bass. You got to go check him out. So I'm thinking in my own world, like, oh, fretless bass. Okay. I'll go check him out.
You're FREEBO. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm FREEBO. Yeah.
So I go there and I see Weather Report and I hear him play, and I'm just astounded and blown away and thinking, oh my God. So afterwards, he was just standing. It was over. He was just standing by the side of the stage, and I just kind of went up to him and I went, excuse me, I said, I just want to tell you, I'm just blown away by your playing. It was fantastic. And he goes, I said, oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Hey, what's your name? I said, FREEBO. He goes, FREEBO. He said, are you a bass player? And I kind of sort of slunk down like, well, not really, but not really a bass player. I kind of slunk down and I said, yeah. He said, yeah. He said, I heard you. You play fretless bass, right? I went, yeah, I got kind of like a little smaller now. He said, yeah. He said, yeah, I heard of you. Yeah, which I thought was pretty cool. Wow, Jocko heard of me, fretless bass. And I asked him some shop questions about what kind of strings and wrote a sound, and he talked about the epoxy he puts on. And then I asked him, I said, can I ask you, it's just a shop question. I said, how many hours a day do you practice? And he had these really, really wide set, almost like E.T. kind of eyes. And he gets so close to me. He says, you really want to know? And I went, yeah. He goes, I practice 2 hours a day. I said, really? 2 hours a day? He said, yes, but those 2 hours are really intense. And I'll never forget that. It's like really, and it's like, it's still inside me. It's still inside me. And I went home that night and I went, I don't know if I could practice 10 hours a day for the next 10 years and maybe be half as good as he is now, not to mention where he's going to be in 10 years. And it was, and I thought maybe, but I decided, no, but I do what I do the way I do it. It's the only thing I know how to do anyway. So I'm going to keep doing what I do and hopefully some inspiration from that. And it turns out it was really interesting because 10 years later, his decline, his physical, mental, spiritual decline happened, and he was gone. And I'll never forget it. The day he died, I thought about it and said, wow, I went back to that time when I met him and going home thinking, should I give up the bass? And I thought, well, he's the hare and I'm the tortoise, and whatever it is, I'm better now and I still have an upward arc. And he doesn't. He
was onto something with that 2 hour thing. Have you ever heard of a book called the 80-20 principle?
Mm-mm.
Basically, it's an economic principle from back in the 1890s. And what it stated was that 20% of your progress comes from 80% of your results. Consequently, 80% of your results come from 20% of your actions. Tapped into that 20%, which gave him the 80%. And so those 2 hours a day must have been really intense.
Well, I also, and that's an interesting principle, I also wonder, because I've also heard other stories where on a bus, if he was, where he was just playing all the time. Yeah. He was manic. So I'm guessing he probably played more than 2 hours and maybe just threw that.
I wouldn't disagree
threw that out to me.
There's a difference between playing and practicing. And I think a lot of I do a number of students. Oh, I've been practicing. Well, how many of those hours were done practicing instead of noodling? And how much of it was focused on what I was showing you? There's a difference, but he made sense. There's a DCI video with Jerry Jamot that he did.
Yes.
And he talks about not practicing as much as thinking about it. So he was visualizing that fingerboard all the time.
I know, I can totally relate to that. I think about that all the time when I'm thinking, bass parts. I'm thinking of the notes and I'm thinking of the fingerboard. And actually, I've learned a lot about the fingerboard on bass. I never took formal lessons, but by playing guitar, acoustic guitar, and certain hammer-ons and certain things, it's really helped me a lot with my bass playing. I don't play like a guitar player, thank God, I think like a bass player. In fact, my guitar playing is really bottom up. Everything I do is bottom up. It's all based on what's happening under here, what's the foundation. But my guitar playing, I think, has helped with the fingerboard of the bass. But like Jerry Jamont, whom I met not too long ago at an LA bar, we had a wonderful conversation. Really cool guy, or sweet guy, and obviously done some great stuff with Aretha and some other people.
Sure.
B.B. King.
What's that?
B.B.
King. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very cool.
Now, FREEBO, you besides Bonnie, you made records, Maria Muldaur. You've recorded that, I think, with Ringo, right, Dr. John? What do you gain from these experiences? How do they improve you as a player when you work with some of these people?
Well, first of all, it's an honor, when somebody asks you to do that. And as a bass player, I mean, we're support musicians. We're there for the person that we're there for the song,
singer, the song, and the soloist. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, what can I do to make, and this goes to one of the earlier questions, what can I do to make the song better? So what can I do to support the vocal, help frame the song? But at the same time, and I think this is a part in recording, like you said earlier, Dave, that, when we first learn to play, we want to play all of our fancy stuff. You learn a lick, and you want to use the lick somewhere, of course, so, where can I, oh, here's a quick place right here. And eventually you learn it, especially when you listen back in recording, you don't get that as much live, because you don't get the perspective of hearing it back. You just do it. You think, oh, that was cool. And I said, well, it was really cool. So you're playing the people out there, your ego's a little bit on fire. Now recording, you kind of go, that's a little too much. So I think ultimately what I try and do is I want to be there, and really, especially now in my latter years, is to really support the song. But at the same time, you want to play something interesting. Yeah, it's partly ego. It's partly I want some of me to be in there. But I think it's also serving, if not the song, serving the arrangement of that song. If everybody's playing, you can't be too interesting, because if everybody's playing too interesting, it takes away from the melody, from the singer. It's all about the singer, because the singer is delivering the song. So it's the song, who's delivering the song, the singer. Okay, we're all support to that. But at the same time, how can I maybe reflect what the singer's singing? Like, for instance, in Midnight at the Oasis, right? Midnight at the da-da-da-da-da, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. When I come up the bass guitar, doom, doom, da-da-da-da, 6, 1, 6, 5, 4. It actually mirrored part of the melody. I'm very proud of that, because it kind of made the song work, for my $85. Matter of fact, Maria just sent me kind of a hip-hop version that somebody put together, Midnight at the Oasis, and it's got this crazy type of drum part. But they kept her melody, her singing, and they kept my bass part very prominent. I went, wow. I don't think it's as cool as Jim Gordon's original part, but it worked. And I'm listening to part, and it's almost 50 years later, and it still sounds good. Yeah.
But I find that interesting too, FREEBO, because people of today went back 50 years to take that. I think that says something for some of the musicians of today.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that. It's nice. Hey, look, you listen to Miles Davis or John Coltrane, and it's those parts from way back, and they're great. Yeah. They're great. McCoy Tyner piano parts that's McCoy Tyner. He kind of invented that whole style, and the jazz musicians are still doing that kind of stuff. Yeah. So look, it feels good, like you say, whether it be Dr. John or Ringo or or Maria or Bonnie. I'm proud of that stuff I've done. It is what it is. It was what it was. In a way, it has nothing to do with today, except that maybe I can learn from that and incorporate the stuff I've learned, put it into my music, into Alice's music, into whatever else I do. I think anytime you work with anybody, you take some of them. I mean, to work with Dr. John, his whole feel, I mean, Mac was a genius. And I mean, and so you kind of approach it with a certain reverence, but at the same time, you can't be too subservient and too much on your knees because you have a role to fulfill. So you got to show up as you, and you got to be an equal in this collaboration. But at the same time, he's the leader, and you're okay. So it's like, what do you want? What can I do? And how do I not be intimidated by you, whom I put on a pedestal because you're an idol of mine? And it's a really tricky balance on how you do that.
Earlier today, Tom and I were talking about some of the albums you had done and some of the other bass players that were on them.
Oh, yes.
And you're in such wonderful company. There's one album where Ron Carter's on, another one with Ray Brown. Another one, Chuck Rainey. I mean, it's so I was saying to Tom earlier today, I said, how wonderful that you are in that same. I want Ron Carter.
Record credit.
I want FREEBO too. I want Ray Brown. I want FREEBO. How wonderful is that?
Oh, yeah, man. Look, I'm almost blushing. It's I don't think of that often, I think you kind of take things for granted, but when I do, reminded by you guys, it's really special. I mean, I remember seeing Ray Brown play when I was over in Europe. I think he was backing up Oscar Peterson and Ella Fitzgerald. And I remember Ray Brown from some of the early jazz recordings that I had heard as a kid. And there's Ray Brown, and he's great. And now I'm on an album, like you say, with Ray Brown, which means that, wow, in some way, I mean, I'm considered, by somebody at least to be on that level. And it's like, oh my God, how did this happen? And like I said, it's like, that's what happens when you're busy making other plans. And it's just a question of just showing up. I mean, I would say that to, both you guys, do bass students, and I think that's what it's all about. And somebody, who's younger or older. I mean, it's what David Amram was talking about, the 90-year-old guy who was just on our show, who's a jazz and classical French horn player and writer. He wrote a beautiful symphony. It's themes, variations on the theme by Woody Guthrie. It's da 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 da, which is a simple Beethoven type of melody, but he weaves this melody all over the place. Or beautiful orchestration. It's really cool. So how do you? And he was just talking about that you just keep showing up and you keep doing your best, and you try and take the lessons you've learned and do your best to stay humble, because it's a tricky balance. We have to have an ego to be who we are. It's natural. We're performers. We want to show ourselves. We're out there. At the same time, how do you find that balance? Like I said, playing a bass part, of being on there and supporting what's going on, but still throwing out a little bit of your personality when it's appropriate, and do something cool where somebody who happens to be listening to bass part goes, oh, that was cool. But where it's not all about the bass part, because it's not all about the bass part. Not, maybe for me it's all about the bass part, but I had to go from, wait, it's all about the bass part, but it's not really all about the bass part. So how do you find that balance of, okay, I got to show up as me, I got to have some ego, but I also have to put my ego aside because everybody else has their egos. So how do we balance all this stuff? And it's an individual choice.
So that's it for tonight's show. I want to thank Tom Semioli and, of course, FREEBO for wonderful conversations and great music. Stay tuned, because next week at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, we'll be playing part 2 of the FREEBO interview. Have a great week. Thanks for tuning in, and you guys take care.